On today's show, the Philadelphia 76ers select Nick Nurse as their next head coach. How does that impact the James Harden sweepstakes? Does it make it more or less likely for James Harden to stay in Philadelphia? And what are all the factors to consider when we look at a potential James Harden return? Plus, Amen Thompson gaining some serious interest from the Houston Rockets. All that and more coming right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin. And the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day every single day. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, none other than the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose. And Ben, we've got some rather interesting news here to start off the show with. The fact that the Philadelphia 76ers have completed their head coaching search, one of the few teams out there that, has started to narrow down that department, and they settled on Toronto's Nick Nurse. And this is interesting for a variety of reasons, because I personally, my immediate reaction when this news came out was Nick Nurse to me does not scream the type of, he doesn't scream retain James Harden at all costs, right? And there's a bunch of different ways that you can look at what this Nick Nurse hire means for the Rockets' potential pursuit of James Harden's potential return, his desire to stay in Philadelphia, all these different competing factors as to what happens with his future. But my immediate reaction is just, I think this further pushes James Harden out of Philadelphia actually, and further towards Houston in the grand scheme of things.
I don't know if I'd say that it pushes him closer to Houston, but it doesn't bring him back in the fold. And when you consider the situation with the 76ers, that's probably the best realistic case scenario for the Rockets if you want James Harden back, because it's not the Mike D'Antoni type of hire that you would make if you were all in on retaining James Harden no matter what. It fits very much with what Daryl Morey actually said in his end of season press conference after they lost to the Celtics in that second round game 7, which is that we'd like to bring James back. That's scenario B, or that's scenario A, but scenario B, we have to get creative. And this sort of underscores that, to me, that there's multiple paths. I think they would love to keep James, but it's not the type of hire like Ramona Shelburne threw out on NBA Today the day after everything went down between the Sixers and Celtics, where she was openly suggesting that the Sixers would or should hire Mike D'Antoni, someone that James is openly comfortable with. I don't think that James is necessarily uncomfortable with Nick Nurse. I think he's spoken well of him in the past as a coach that he respects, but it's not someone that has that built-in connection. And as far as Nick Nurse's history, look, we know he won the championship in 2019 with Toronto, and then he tried to make it work the next few years after Kawhi Leonard left the Raptors. He's very much the type of coach that is going to find a way to make the best of the cards that he's dealt. And in this case, I'm not trying to necessarily compare 2019 Kawhi to 2023 Harden. In this analogy, it's Joel Embiid that would be their version of 2019 Kawhi. But I do think that Nick Nurse is a guy who, because of his ability to scrap, his ability to get the best out of role players, especially veterans, he's very much the kind of coach, in my opinion, that you would hire if you were trying to maximize a veteran supporting cast, which in reality is what the Sixers are going to have to do if they don't have James Harden, because they don't have a lot in the way of draft capital. They don't have a ton of young players. They don't have a ton in the way of salary cap flexibility to make outside moves. So Nick Nurse is someone who can very much sort of MacGyver his way into getting the best out of Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris and whatever they have left of this current team. Now, I don't think it's waving the white flag on James Harden by any means, but it's also not something that tells me the Sixers are willing to go all out to give him a 4-year max. Because if the Sixers are willing to do that, I'll be blunt, Jackson, I think he goes back, because I just do not think the Rockets are willing to do that for the reasons that we've laid out in our prior pods. I think the Rockets are potentially interested in Harden as far as conditionally. I think they're willing to go maybe 2 years, 2+ some sort of team option. I don't think they're willing to move heaven and earth and give him a 4-year max. So if Philadelphia is, that would be bad for the Rockets. I don't think a Nick Nurse hire, it doesn't indicate to me that they are willing to go to that length. It indicates to me that they're willing to talk, that they would like to have him back, but that they're going to try and make the best of the situation no matter what.
Yeah, when I look at it and I'm trying to think, if all things are, I guess if all variables are considered equal, I think the number one thing is going to be the contract first and foremost, right? There are different reasons for why James would A, want to stay in Philadelphia, or B, why he would want to come back to Houston. There's off the court stuff. There's the on the court factors to consider, right? Rockets and Philly Rockets and Sixers are in two completely different stages of their respective NBA life cycles, all those different variables. But when you look at also, I guess when you look at Nick Nurse versus Ime Udoka, those are two coaches that don't necessarily scream James Harden on the surface either guy, right? They're both, a bit prickly, a bit more demanding on the defensive side.
Although Harden did have the year with Udoka in Brooklyn a couple of years back.
He did have he had the year there. However, Ime wasn't the one calling all the shots quite at that point. Just
saying there's a relationship.
There is, for sure. I guess when you look at all factors considered equal, I think the biggest factor, here is going to be the contract, right? And whether or not, if Philly and Houston were to each offer the exact same contract, now whether that means a 4-year max, whether that's trying to lowball the offer a little bit, let's just pretend in a vacuum that Philly and Houston both offer the exact same deal, whether it's max, whether it's a little bit below the max, whatever it is, 35 a year, 40 a year, whatever. I think that, how do you view then the rest of the factors? And currently, does it look more like James to Houston if the contracts were the same, or does it feel like some of the factors are still drawing him back to Philadelphia at this point?
Yeah, to me, this would seem to point to Houston, but reading the tea leaves, I think if the money is fairly similar, there's a reason why this has been rumored since Christmas. I think there's genuine interest. I think it just comes down to whether the money is comparable. And if it is, I think he would choose the Rockets. I think it just comes down to how desperate Philadelphia is. And to me, this sort of indicates exactly what Gerald said in his end of season press conference, that it's something they're open to. They would like to do it, but they have limits. And if they have limits, I think the odds are good, assuming that it's what the Rockets want. And we'll see what happens with the draft. Do they get Scoot Henderson? Do they get Amen Thompson? But I do think it continues to be a viable path for the Rockets. And I won't say it's not really the best case scenario. I said earlier, realistic best case scenario, because, in a perfect world, the Sixers would hire someone similar to Steven Silas in 2020, and a young coach like that might potentially usher into a rebuild. But realistically, Daryl Morey was never going to do that with this particular hire. They were always going to try to maximize Joel Embiid, who is the priority. Even if James Harden might have one foot out the door, we have heard nothing to indicate that Joel Embiid does. He's under contract for a lot of years. He just won MVP. So they were never going to hire the type of unproven guy, in my opinion, that might potentially have them pivot to an all-out rebuild. It was going to be a proven name. It's just among the proven names, what are their connections to James Harden? And the fact that they bypass someone like Mike D'Antoni that does have connections, for someone in Nick Nurse, that it's not like there's any animosity, to my knowledge, between Nurse and Harden, but there's not that built-in relationship. And so what that indicates to me is, again, exactly what Gerald said. They're open to it. They would like to bring him back, but there are limits. It's not an all-out priority. And if it's not an all-out priority for the Sixers, then that does present an opening for the Rockets, because my read is that if the money and years are comparable, I think he would like to be back in Houston, all things equal.
There's the other side of the Nick Nurse to Philly argument that says that why would Nick Nurse go to a situation where James Harden might be getting ready to bolt? We're going to unpack that, as well as a little bit later on in the show. Apparently, the Rockets are enamored with Amen Thompson as a draft prospect. We're going to get there in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful, right? You're trying to go out and have a good time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events happening near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped up for the fun that you're going to be having, right? They've got flash deals on last-minute tickets. It's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. They've got images of the seat view so you know exactly the type of bang that you're getting for your buck that you're spending. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Go check them out. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your very first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Be sure to stay tuned in throughout the week as we have it covered for all of the NBA draft coverage concerning your Houston Rockets, what certain prospects might be going up draft boards, sliding down the draft boards, all that good stuff right here at Locked On Rockets. Now, Ben, there's the other argument that I saw kind of being floated around the Twitter streets, if you will, that why would Nick Nurse seemingly choose to go to a situation or bypass other potential coaching opportunities, be it the Milwaukee Bucks, be it the Suns? And obviously we don't know how, deep into the coaching search process he became as a candidate for some of these other teams. We know that he was likely at the top of the list for a lot of the openings around the entire association.
Milwaukee and Phoenix, certainly.
Yeah. So, let's pretend for a second that maybe Nick Nurse had his, pick of the litter between these different organizations. Wouldn't that maybe point to the fact that there's maybe more confidence in Philadelphia, that they are at least closer to retaining James Harden than one would have thought a week ago?
Perhaps, but this is where you can look at some of the details and the specificity of the reporting that's out there from Woj. And he's reported tonight that Embiid met with Nurse during this process, and this is a guy who's still in his 20s, coming off an MVP season. Look, I'm not saying that Philadelphia without Harden and with Embiid is a great situation, but it's not terrible. Look, they have a pathway potentially to max salary cap room in 2024 if they want it. You also have Tobias Harris, who's basically an expiring contract that could get them in the game for a lot of guys. You have Tyrese Maxey, who is continuing to get better. It's not like if James Harden leaves that Philadelphia is a wasteland. Are they at the top of the list? Not necessarily, but again, you look at the other situations, there's nothing perfect there either. Could Embiid conceivably ask out and sort of declare a crazy situation and sort of nuclear bomb?
I'm sorry. I love that crazy situation has become like this, like synonymous, just like, hey, crazy situation. It's and that means trade me. It's all going downhill.
But it's like, that's true almost anywhere. Like, if you're going through a coaching change, there's some level of instability in the organization. There's some hurdle they can't get over that inherently leads to questions. Like Milwaukee, they just lost to an 8 seed in 5 games. What if Giannis asks out in a year or two? With Phoenix, look, they've gone out incredibly sad the last couple of years. Chris Paul is almost 40. Kevin Durant is now in his mid-30s. It's not like that outside of Devin Booker is a super firm situation in terms of, for the next 4 or 5 years that they are set. No, there's easily a world where CP and KD age out and Devin Booker ask out in a year or two. There's no perfect situation. So I do think that, at face value, you can say that the reality is that they all have basically just one star. We're talking about Embiid, Giannis, and Booker, that you can say is clearly a foundational piece for 3 to 5 or more years. Beyond that, in all those situations, there's uncertainty, there's questions. And so with that in mind, I think it just goes down to, well, certainly finances play a part. How willing is each ownership group to invest? And I think that's something where Philadelphia in a larger market may have been willing to go the extra mile financially for Nurse, perhaps throwing more for his assistants. But also it comes down to, again, Embiid met with Nurse in this process. If they've got a degree of comfort with one another, and it's not like there's clearly a destination that Embiid could get to, not like he has that much leverage contractually to begin with, but it's not like there's a clear suitor just waiting that can take Embiid to the next level. No, I mean, maybe Embiid feels good about his partnership with Nurse making.
I hear the Rockets have some cap space. They could just absorb him, and they've got a pretty good coach too in Email. No, I'm kidding. That
would be the ultimate Daryl Morey role. But look, I think
you know what they should do. They should try and pair James Harden and Joel Embiid. That duo would be so good. There's no way they'd ever flame out in Game 7 of a playoff series, right?
No, especially not with Jalen Green doing what Tyrese Maxey could not. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. That duo would that duo would be a guaranteed finals trip.
Yeah. But look, the bottom line is none of those situations is perfect. And Philadelphia is a larger market. There's more money, perhaps for the assistants as well. I think it just comes down to and this is what the reporting indicates, that there's a comfort level between Embiid, who is the reigning MVP of the league, clearly the best player ahead of James Harden, and Nick Nurse. And they're just going to try and make the best out of that partnership. And in a perfect world, because it's not like they have a clear path to replace James, because it's not like, they'd be under the cap by that much immediately. So in a perfect world, they would retain him. If they don't, again, it's not like it's a wasteland. Tyrese Maxey can go into a bigger role. You have Tobias Harris as an expiring. You have a pathway to max salary cap room a year from now if you want it. It's not like there are no other avenues. So I'm just tempted to think that, look, this is a plan A, maximize Joel Embiid, and I think in a perfect world, they would love to keep James Harden and make him a part of that. And Woj's article does say that they are working to re-sign James Harden. I just think, again, it goes back to what Daryl Morey said. There are limits. It's not like the Houston days in which Philly is going to give James Harden the keys and say, no matter what, no matter how many years, no matter how much money, we're doing everything for you. No, they want James, but there are limits. And so that, to me, gives the opening to a team like the Rockets. And,
I find it so fascinating that if Philly, who is the team that currently has James Harden, I guess, sort of, right, he's the, they're the incumbent team, I guess. Is that the right terminology to use there? There we go.
No, it is.
So if they are the team that's willing to lay the framework for some reasoning as to why, hey, we're not going to go completely all in on you. We want to bring you back. We're excited about the idea of bringing you back. Mm-hmm. We're bringing in Nick Nurse. We think we want to run it back with this team, but we're also prepared to do it without you. I hope what that would mean is that the Rockets are also willing to set some boundaries here, right? That the Rockets aren't simply going to say, this is our chance. Let's go get him. And, either that means, a 4-year max, or maybe that means other potential concessions, roster adjustments. Hey, I like this guy. I don't like this guy. Hey, go get me this guy. Because that, to me, has been one of the biggest worries is you see what's going on, like the parallel to what's going on in Portland right now, right? Portland is about to forego a beautiful reset opportunity with the number 3 pick in order to continue catering to an aging star in Damian Lillard, which is just, at this point, it's basketball malpractice. The fact that they're getting ready to trade more than likely this number 3 overall pick to cater to an aging star that they still have not been able to win games with. And by trading that pick, it's not going to put you in any better situation than you've been in historically with Dame. So for
mediocrity treadmill.
Exactly. Yeah. And so for a James Harden return, that I think is my fear, and as many Rockets fans' fears, is the idea that if James Harden returns, what do those concessions start to look like, right? Is James Harden going to come back and start demanding everything be catered around him, start adjusting rosters and lineups and this, that, and the other thing? Yeah. Or is it simply, hey, we're bringing James back, and you've got to understand that we're doing it a very different way for round 2 with you than it was during your first go-through?
Sure. But the counter to that, in my opinion, is consider why these leaks continue to come out as frequently as they have ever since Christmas. In my opinion, it's because there is no perfect deal just waiting for James. It's not like the Rockets are offering him the keys to the franchise the way it was a few years ago. In my opinion, if the Rockets were willing to give him a 4-year max and said, James, you can come back and this can be your franchise, your team, the way it used to be, this would be done. You wouldn't hear anything else. It's pretty clear. The reporting has been out there and well established enough that he has genuine interest in returning to Houston. I believe that through not just going through the reports, but things that I've heard as well. I do believe it's genuine. It's not just a leverage play. There is genuine interest there. Yet the reason we continue to hear these rumors is that it's not as if the perfect deal, the perfect arrangement is there yet. There's interest, but there is uncertainty as well. And so that's why you keep hearing these things, perhaps as a little nudge to try and get the Rockets or some other team, maybe it's Philly if he stays there, to offer a little bit more, which tells you that these teams are not offering everything right now. That's why you keep hearing these leaks, because it's not like James Harden is secure that he just has to wait until, 5 p.m. on June 30th or whenever the window officially opens and he gets that dream offer, max money and years. In my opinion,
it's like they're both at the poker table and they keep raising just like back and forth a little bit, right? Where neither team has put in their best, they're like all in offer yet, and they keep going up ever so slightly.
Yeah. And so that's what I would say, besides, what little tidbits we've heard and what we've seen from some of the reporting, and Jonathan Fagan of the Chronicle, who I think is as plugged in as it gets on the Houston side, has said that it comes down to, terms and trade-offs. The Rockets aren't looking for a super long-term commitment. They want some sort of value, either in terms of years and overall money, or ideally both. Again, I think if you're looking at the clues objectively, I think it's pretty clear that he has not found a slam dunk deal in either location just yet. And so because of that, that should give you at least some confidence that the Rockets are not just going to say you can have whatever you want and throw common sense and all of your rebuilding principles from the last 3 years out the door. No, they're trying to balance the two. And if James fits into that as, a short-term veteran, the floor general, to get guys like Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. and Alperen Sengun the ball in better spots, and perhaps to bridge the transition to your next point guard of the future, maybe an Amen Thompson or a Scoot Henderson. I know we'll get into that as we close out the show. Then great, we can talk about that. But I just don't think that, besides what we've heard, I just don't think the context clues suggest that the Rockets are anywhere close to saying James Harden will give you everything you want. In my opinion, that's why these whispers continue to be out there, because James is still searching for that ideal deal that he does not have just yet.
It's going to be crazy when Orlando swoops in and says, hey, we'll give you the GM hat and a max contract right out of the gate. Now, on that note, let's shift gears here. We do want to talk about Amen Thompson and the apparent organization just being enamored with him as a prospect, and kind of what that means for the Rockets and their pre-draft process moving forward. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, kind of piggybacking off some of the James Harden discussion here, we'll pivot a little bit, but this conversation goes hand in hand, I think, because so much of the Rockets' decision, despite the fact that we've discussed this before, Ben, shouldn't be impacted by what the Rockets ultimately do or do not do in regards to the James Harden sweepstakes, if you will. The impact of the decision of what they do at pick number 4, though, will deal with, I guess there will be ramifications on what they do with the Harden stuff. Like how does whoever they select at pick number 4 then factor into a roster that does or does not include James Harden? And we've got some reporting from The Athletic's Kelly Iko about where the Rockets kind of stand as far as their views on Amen Thompson. So I'm going to read this back really quick. There's a reason why so many within the Rockets organization are so enamored with him. Everything about him oozes potential, the defensive intensity and attention to detail, the explosiveness and athleticism, the ball handling and playmaking. It's hard to not see those qualities in a young player and not envision what he could look like next to Jalen Green, a gifted young scorer and elite athlete. So that makes sense, right? Those are all the, kind of the benefits for what an Amen Thompson could provide. I think, Ben, when I look at this and I look at what the Rockets could or, couldn't do with pick number 4, the consideration for me has always been the runway has kind of, you've run out of runway basically at this point, as far as just being given free reign to develop these guys as you see fit, right? The Rockets had a window of time where everything could be prioritized towards development because wins truly did not matter. Now you're in a position where, with the pick being, owed to Oklahoma City next season, while I still don't think you necessarily take that heavily into your calculus as to how you approach next season, clearly there's an organizational incentive to not be a bottom 3 team again in the NBA landscape. So with that, if you were to bring back a James Harden type, I do wonder how beneficial it would be for him to be able to kind of bridge the gap a little bit with the guy like Amen Thompson, or even potentially a guy like a Scoot Henderson, although I think that pairing works a little bit less, as far as maybe extending that developmental runway a little bit to where a prospect like that could then maybe come off the bench conceivably and not necessarily have all the pressure of starting right out of the gate and being expected to be not only a guy who's developing and finding himself as an NBA player as a rookie in the league, but also being expected to be a contributing member of I won't say a winning basketball team, but a team that is striving towards taking those steps towards being, a 500 basketball club at a minimum.
Yeah, and maybe James Harden is a 60-game player now. I've seen that suggestion tossed out, and he turns 34 years old this offseason. Look, you're going to give him maintenance games on back-to-backs. I would think at this stage of his career, he's also had a few nagging injuries. He had the Achilles this year. A couple of years ago, it was the hamstring. So
Harden is notoriously one of those guys that's so hard to hold out of games, though, right? Like if he's healthy, he's like,
I know,
I'm
but what I'm saying is that now he's 34 years old, and he's had these mileage things pile up. Perhaps this is what forces him to think a little bit differently, or at least the organization to drive, I guess, a bit of a harder bargain in their negotiations, which we said earlier that we both believe that they are willing to do. Then again, maybe that's one of those conversations you can have now, given that you do hold some power in 2023 that you couldn't have done in, say, 2019 or 2020 when James held all the cards because he was just that damn good and he had you, basically, over a barrel. Like there was nothing that you could have done back then. But at this point, the Rockets do have a little bit more leverage. And above all else, I just find it refreshing. I know you had your pod looking into the fake trades, and look, I thought the valuation was wrong, but let's be honest. Kelly Iko is a very good reporter. He absolutely does his homework in terms of talking to people around the league. And that's where some of it does come down to media literacy and consuming it in the right way. He wasn't saying the Rockets were exploring any of these deals. These were hypotheticals. And of course, he bounced them off of beat writers from other teams. And you can say that, maybe he should have a better handle on what the value is. Perhaps. But at the end of the day, look, his value is to report. And in that situation, he made it clear that this is not reporting. This is going into hypotheticals of how he might play it if he was running the Rockets. This bit about Amen Thompson, that is actual reporting that the Rockets are enamored by him. And besides his obvious gifts as a playmaker with length and athleticism and, two-way elements to his game as well, potentially, I also think that it tells you that the Rockets are thinking, at least as of now, in what I believe to be the correct way with how they should handle this number 4 asset. Look, if you are potentially bringing in James Harden, he is your floor raiser. In my opinion, that's a huge part of why you should want James Harden, assuming that he's willing to come under the right terms, both in terms of money, control the franchise, et cetera, et cetera. We've talked about it before. Look, James Harden is your guy that's going to make you relevant, get you from low 20s in wins to maybe low to mid 30s, and at least somewhat on the fringe of the play-in tournament, make you relevant. So with that in mind, why would you then trade an asset as good as a top 4 lottery pick that's got all sorts of club control, friendly financial terms for years, all sorts of upside for a veteran like, some of the
for another floor raising piece, basically.
Yeah, why would you do that? Unless James Harden is asking that. And if that's the case, again, I think the Rockets would walk away, and they should walk away. We've made that clear before. But in this hypothetical where James Harden is willing to come to the Rockets and basically be their floor raiser, then that should incentivize them to look at this pick and say, hey, we need to think long-term. We need to think basically upside. And there's clearly more upside, even if there's a bit greater risk because someone in the draft has not played in the NBA yet. There's also clearly more upside than whatever you could trade that pick for. Because if you're giving up, look, it's pretty clear. If you're getting a veteran for the pick, you're going to get someone with a higher floor but a lower ceiling. That's why the team trading the veteran to the Rockets would be doing it, because they think that they've sort of maxed out the way they are, and they see Amen Thompson or Scoot Henderson or whoever they could get with the 4 pick as having a greater long-term ceiling than the guy they have now. Well, if you're the Rockets and you're not going to win a championship no matter what, and you have James Harden coming in, which inherently raises your floor, what exactly is the point to then trying to go from, say, 35 wins to 40 or something like that in a year? You're not going to win the championship anyway. You're already relevant no matter what if you're adding James Harden. So, again, not that I think Harden is a done deal, but with all this reporting, and I definitely don't think that the Nick Nurse hire in Philadelphia hurts the cause, then it just makes me feel a lot better that you're hearing links between the Rockets and these draft prospects, that you're not hearing the intel that you are out of Portland, which is that the Blazers really want
that they're trading that pick no matter. It's like they're playing hot potato with the pick. Like, get it out of our hands. We're tired of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because what you should be saying is if Harden is coming in, then hold on. Why are we trying to double down? No, if Harden's coming in, that is your floor raiser. So we can think long term. We can think upside, which is most likely keeping that pick. I mean, I guess there's a few scenarios where, I've seen the hypothetical of like 4-20 for 6-11 from Orlando, and you stay in the draft, move down a little bit, and then get a slightly higher second pick. I mean, I guess, but even in that scenario, you're still talking about drafting. What I'm saying is that you shouldn't be looking to trade out if you have James Harden coming in under the right conditions. And so to me, it's not a declarative report that the Rockets aren't going to trade out, but it's more evidence, in my opinion, that they are thinking of this under the appropriate terms.
Yeah, we're not hearing nearly any level of like smoke about the Rockets other than just kind of the surface level. Like, we'll consider doing anything with the pick, right? Like we might trade up, we might trade down, we might trade out. So.
And here's the other thing I should mention about it. Besides any connection to Harden, I also think it's smart for the Rockets to leak interest in Almond, just as it was a year ago to leak interest in Paolo Banchero, because when you're in, and they're basically in the same spot that they were this time a year ago, when you take Victor out of the draft, and let's just be real, Wemby is his own tier, there seems to be, in some order, Scoot Henderson,
three guys.
Brandon Miller. Yeah, three guys. And the Rockets are at the back of the three teams again. So as of now, Amen Thompson is at the back of most of the consensus mocks, the same way that Paolo Banchero was a year ago. It makes sense for you, just from an asset perspective, to leak to the rest of the league that we are comfortable with that scenario. Because if word gets out that you aren't comfortable with that scenario, then the teams in front of you, like let's say you really do want Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller, and you really want to trade up to Charlotte or Portland to make that happen, if they feel that you are desperate, which is what's saying, we don't like this Amen Thompson, we're nervous about Amen or any other options at 4, then they're going to have you in a tough spot. So just from a leverage spot, when you are at the back of a tier, which they are with Scoot, Amen, and Brandon Miller, the same way they were at the back of the Paolo Banchero, Jabari Smith Jr., and Chet Holmgren tier a year ago, it makes sense for you to leak that, at least in the early stages, that you're okay with the guy that's at least perceived to be at the back of that tier, just because it tells the teams in front of you, hey, you're not going to be able to take advantage of Houston because they are comfortable with staying pat.
Here's the problem is, do we think that they're actually leaking it this time around, or do we think that they're actually interested in Amen Thompson? Because the problem is last year they were actually so invested in Paolo Banchero, and it was the NBA's worst kept secret.
But I think it can be both.
Like maybe last year was the lesson, right? Where Rafael Stone was like playing apartment guide, like he was running through Zillow listings with Paolo Banchero trying to find him his apartment here in Houston, taking him out to dinner and stuff, and now this time around he's like, okay, maybe if I play it the exact same way, we can actually get one of those other two guys to drop. This is our don your tinfoil hats, because this is the conspiracy theory this year, is that Rafael Stone learned his lesson from last draft season, and he's now angling all his focus towards Amen Thompson in a way to try and fake out the other two teams and kind of juke them or bait them into taking Amen Thompson instead of one of Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller. That would be it. Look, I'll tell you what. If that actually happens, I will
the same way, and force Scoot to follow the same way they did with Jabari a year ago, even if it wasn't, I say force in air quotes.
Well, see, the problem is they fell ass backwards into Jabari, but if they actually do it in a calculated sense this year to acquire one of Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller,
I don't think they were uncomfortable with Jabari this time a year ago. I mean, I believe that they genuinely did like Paolo, but I think it can be both. It can be you really like this guy, but you also know it doesn't hurt your options in terms of trade negotiation, because it was reported the Rockets did reach out to Orlando about potentially moving up to 1. They just couldn't come to a deal, and ultimately they were okay enough with Jabari that they weren't willing to pay whatever premium Orlando was seeking to move up to 1, to what we now know was Paolo. And so I do think it can be a little bit of both. It can be that, you like the guy, like a Paolo last year or Amen this year, but it also can be, look, it's just smart to sort of let the teams in front of you know that, hey, like, we're not just going to desperately move up no matter what for this guy. We're okay with, however this shakes out. And perhaps it ends up giving them more options, and maybe they fall into somebody this year the same way that, Orlando taking Paolo in the last 24 hours made them fall into Jabari last year.
Is Rafael Stone playing the two teams above the Rockets, Charlotte and Portland, like a pair of fiddles, or is this just another case of being overly excited about a prospect? Does Nick Nurse in Philadelphia push James Harden closer to Houston? Let us know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But on that note, Ben, you know the drill. Let everybody know where they can track you down at.
Yep, Ben DuBose on Twitter, The Logger Line on Twitter, The Rockets Wire on Twitter, and rocketswire.usatoday.com for all of your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked on Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.